You're listening to Bible Truth Feed, a podcast by christadelphianvideo.org for Christadelphians and all those seeking the truth about the Bible message. Join us now as we present our latest episode.
This conference will now be recorded.
Well, welcome here, everyone. Welcome to Family Matters for the 25th of May, 2020. Tonight, our special guests are Matt and Lydia Nutter, and it's really good to have you guys here with us. We're going to be talking about finances and debt. Now, Matt and Lydia have been running Kiwi Debt, a debt advice company. I think is that how you describe it?
Debt management and insolvency. Yeah.
Yep. Since 2008, and so they have a wealth of experience to offer us in this regard, and especially with the recent downturn of the economy and any loss of income that's come from the coronavirus. It's something that's going to affect us all. So we're really looking forward to the chat tonight with Matt and Lydia, and then to some questions afterwards. So what we'll do first is just start with a word of prayer. So if you just bow your heads. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the blessings that you have poured out on us today. We thank you for this technology that we're able to meet together like this and to be able to discuss things that are really important to us. And we know that things like money are what makes the world go round, and we have to live with it. And we have to manage it because it's one of those gifts that you have given us to be able to live in this world that you put us in. And we pray that as we discuss it tonight, you would help us to learn the right way of dealing with money and with debt, and to be able to leave the only debt outstanding being the debt of love that we have to one another. So pray that you would bless our evening together and guide us in the things that we say and do. Through Jesus Christ. Amen. Right, I thought we'd start tonight with a Bible quote, and this one is from 1 Timothy chapter 6. I think it's a really neat one as far as finances go, and it's 1 Timothy chapter 6, starting at verse 6, and it says this: "For godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that." People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. And I think you've seen that in your time in debt management, Matt and Lydia.
The root of all evil. Well, perhaps I'll touch a little bit on that a little bit later. But what perhaps and Timothy is 100% spot on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it over to Lydia just to give you a little bit of groundwork in terms of the debt and the basics, and then I'm going to come back and have a chat about some of the in-depth sort of things that we've come across, and perhaps some pitfalls, but also some things that might be able to be handy in your life when it comes to debt.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so first of all, hi, and thanks for taking your time this evening to participate in our discussion around debt. So firstly, I wanted to start off with a little background on Matthew, myself, and Kiwi Debt. So Matthew and I travelled to the UK in 2002 and spent the next 5 years in London, travelling and working in various jobs, one which included a debt management company, which Matthew was employed. When the time came to make a decision to return home, one night Matt announced, Why don't we start up a debt management company in New Zealand? Well, at that stage, I had a beautiful little bundle growing in my tummy. Setting up a company was the furthest away from my thoughts. However, sparing you all the details, 2 days after having our amazing daughter Holly, we were on the ground, up and running with Kiwi Debt. And here today, 14 years later, helping and assisting those who were burdened with debt. So along the way, both Matthew and I have been humbled by situations and the lives of people we have the pleasure of dealing with daily. So what is debt? The definition of debt, simply, a sum of money that is owed or due, a state of owing money. What are types of debt? There is secured debt and unsecured debt. What is secured debt? Secured debt is debt backed or secured by collateral to reduce the risk associated with lending, commonly probably all known to us as a mortgage or possibly a car loan. Unsecured debt? Unsecured debt refers to loans that are not backed by collateral. So some examples of these are most credit cards, store cards, personal loans, payday loans, family loans, short-term loans. And you've probably all seen ads on TV or heard on the radio some very popular loan companies with very catchy names, and I'll name just a few. Save My Bacon, Can't Wait, Seed Cash, Quick Cash, Wallet Wizard, Moolah, Tiny Loans, Advance Cash, and the most recent one, Lockdown Loans. And there are so many more that you'd be familiar with. How can you get into debt? Well, firstly, I'd like to dispel the common thought or notion that people in debt have just been simply silly with money. This is not the case. It is for a very small percentage of people. However, this is not what we have experienced. We hear and listen daily that a huge event has happened in the lives of people that seem way beyond their control. So some examples of these are loss of job, reduction of income, loss of regular overtime, sickness of a family member or yourself, separation, divorce, gambling. In these events in the lives of people, it is very difficult to manage. All of a sudden, one income into the household has stopped or has to be split, or the main income is now not available. However, expenses still need to be accommodated for. So when you're in debt or know people or friends that are struggling with debt, for whatever reason, it is really important not to judge them and their situation. Those of us who have never been in a bad debt situation will find it hard to grasp or possibly even understand. As with many situations you could find yourself in, this is unknown to you unless you are experiencing this firsthand. When you are in debt, what effect does this have? We know from our dealings with our clients that debt has an immense impact in different ways. 1, breakdown of relationships, health issues, depression, anxiety, not coping day to day, violence in relationships, the feeling of being overwhelmed, just not seeing a way out, and helplessness, just to name a few. However, there is a way to rehabilitate your debt situation. So before I hand you over to Matthew, a little story to tell. So Dad and I were talking the other day, and he reminded me of a story which I will share with you tonight. Now, this is going back some time when both my sister and I were living at home, attending primary school. So way before my hair went grey. Just like any other day, Dad comes home from work. However, this night he received a call to attend an unexpected, urgent AB's meeting that evening. After having dinner with the family, he excused himself and was getting ready to attend the meeting. Judy, my mum, explained to Winton, "Winton, the car is really low on petrol. In fact, nearly empty. All we have is 50 cents. Dad said to Judy, "Good, Judy, at least we've got 50 cents. I will stop to get petrol on the way," and he did, not knowing whether he would reach his destination or even make it to the meeting at all. However, I can tell you he made it to and from the meeting, and as the old saying goes, on the smell of an oily rag. Now, I tell you this story as I know my dad really well. He would have entered the meeting as though nothing was amiss, without anyone knowing of his situation at the current time that he was experiencing, and all looked well on the outside. So we can fall into this trap as well by assuming all looks good on the outside as we paint a picture of our friends, our work colleagues, our brothers and sisters, thinking their life must be so much easier than mine. They don't have to be worrying about how I'm going to pay the bills, how am I going to afford food, how am I going to pay the power account. However, no one knows each person's individual circumstances when it comes to debt. So with debt, it can be a really embarrassing subject to broach. However, opening up and talking about it is the first step in making the path to debt rehabilitation to achieve a goal. So I'd like to just put you over to Matt, who will talk a lot more into the depth about debt and anything that you might like to know from him and myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia.
Thanks, Lydia. Yeah, that's really cool.
So we did touch on this a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about budgeting, and all merit to that presentation. It was absolutely fantastic. In terms of the budgeting side of things, I'm not going to delve too much into that tonight, but what I really want to do is start to talk about, before we get into debt, when we're in debt, and coming out the other side of debt. There is a life cycle, and even though banks and finance companies would rather keep you in debt forever, because that's the only way they make money, we want to start to look at some of those things which come up. So first of all, before you even start to get into debt, you've got to ask the question, do you need it? The next question you're going to ask yourself is, what am I using it for? Now, sometimes the what and the do I need it are about the same time. The next thing is it going to be secured or is it going to be unsecured? Obviously, if you're buying a house and you're getting a mortgage, then that's going to be a secured debt. The next thing you look at is, what is the cost of the debt? Now, if you're going to get a loan against an asset and it's going to be secured, is the cost worth the risk that you're going to be taking? The next question is, if it is secured, can I afford to lose it? Now, that's a big question, and perhaps that's one to just think on for a little bit.
So what do you mean by that, Matt?
What's that?
What do you mean by that?
Well, again, if it's a secured asset and something happens in your life, COVID,
so is that like a instance?
Yeah. So if you've got if you're using it as collateral against a loan and you default on the loan, is it an asset that you can afford to lose?
Okay.
And that helps to prioritize the type of debt that you've got. Okay, so I did touch on this a couple of weeks back, but what happens if I need to repair or replace the item that's secured? Now, that's a bit of a strange one because we've got security, or there are people with security against cars, there are people with security against houses, there are people with security against washing machines. And again, what I touched on a couple of weeks back was what happens if something breaks down, and if it's in its warranty period and it can be repaired, then that's great. But what happens if it breaks down outside the warranty period? And then, of course, you're going to have to start to look at how do you replace it when you're already paying for finance on one item. Now, when it comes to business, there's a part of supplier contracts, and anyone who's been in business will probably be nodding their head about now. So, and this is the part of the supplier contract that says you're going to give a personal guarantee against the business's account. Now, this is a bit of a trap that some people fall into because, of course, if you sell that business and the account gets passed on to the new provider, then the chances are that you'll actually still be providing security against the debt that somebody else is using. So again, you've got to be very careful about that. So if your budget's got a deficit, now this is again what we started to talk about the other week. What happens when the income and the outgoings don't meet your needs? You know, in typical budgeting, if you go to a budget, they're going to say reduce the outgoings until you've got enough to cover your debt. Now, that's easy to say. However, it's very hard to do, and especially in the wake of COVID-19, when the hit on people's income is probably going to be substantial enough to reduce it to a point where they don't have enough to meet their minimum expenses and their living costs, let alone going into paying debt and trying to keep things balanced. So I'm going to just take a break from the debt side of things for a minute in terms of what we do, and just have a look at some of the biblical references which give us a little bit of an inkling, but as I'm going to show you, it's not a great deal of help. Now, Romans 13:8, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. You pointed that one out earlier, Robert, and you know that is that's the mainstay of what we should be believing. Proverbs 22 verse 7, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave of the lender. Now that's pretty strong words when I started to look into it, but it's as relevant today as it was in the days of Solomon. You know, and you know, at that time, you were the slave. If you could not repay your loan, you were indebted to the person in a physical way. It hasn't changed much now, although you're probably not going to get pulled into to do the ploughing. However, you are put in a position where you owe the person, and they will certainly let you know about that. Psalm 37:21. The wicked borrows and does not repay, but the righteous shows mercy and gives. Matthew chapter 5, verse 42. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, don't turn away. Luke chapter 6, 35. But love your enemies, do good and lend, hoping for nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you'll be sons of the Most High. Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Romans 13:8. Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law. Proverbs again. Do not be, this is chapter 22, verse 26 and 27. Do not be one of those who shakes hands in a pledge, one of those who is a surety of your debts, if you have nothing with which to pay. Why should he take away your bed from under you?
Mm.
Proverbs 22:16. Whoever oppresses the poor for his own increase, and whoever gives to the rich, both come to poverty. Now I've got two more. Proverbs 22 verse 2. Proverbs 12 verse 2. Good people obtain favor from the Lord, but he condemns those who devise wicked schemes. And the last one, Proverbs 22 verse 1. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold. So the Bible tells us so many different messages about debt. If we started to look at them all, and there are hundreds, we'll probably be still listing them tomorrow. Yeah, over 800. So it'd seem that the main message is don't be a borrower, be a lender. And if you're a lender, don't expect anything back. Now, this in itself is a little bit contradictory, because when Jesus is outlining the parable of the talents, although it's read both in monetary terms and skills terms, it can be applied to investment from a moneylender and the expected return. So is it the Jews were so hung up on money, he was just trying to relate to the audience that he was preaching to? Hard to say. In terms of what I'll refer to as a biblical paradox, he was trying to relate, I think, to the audience he was preaching to. The problem is, in our society, there are few lenders and there are a lot of borrowers. So how can we balance what's physical and spiritual? Well, I don't have the answer to that one, and that is an individual question. The only thing I can do is tell you that each time you borrow, there is a cost to it. The Bible refers to it as usury, and that's the price for borrowing, which we're paying to the lender. We call it interest. However, with the changing times and the amount of greed that there is out there, control breeds wickedness. In recent times, when people get behind in their payments, even by a little bit, they are hammered with default costs and punitive fees. So it's adding insult to injury in a lot of cases. Lydia did a great job in outlining what debt is at the start of the conversation. So let's widen that net a little bit further. So debt we're talking about is in a monetary term. We know that there's the debt of a favour, where you can make a pledge to someone to repay by your assistance something that they did for you. And I think we discussed that a couple of weeks ago, that we don't want to owe anyone for services. But again, we're focusing on financial debt. So let's just break down a little bit more detail about these debts. So we've got a mortgage. Okay, you get a house, you get a loan. The loan's secured against the house. That's a priority. A car loan, the car breaks down and the wheels fall off, whatever. You get a loan to buy your car. It's secured against the car. Easy. Lydia's talked about credit cards and cash loans, and also borrowing from a friend. But that's not all. I'm sure, and we'll talk about this later, who's got a mobile phone that's on a contract? Each month you have to pay a fee. Now, the services have been provided. Now you have a debt to that company. What about a power account? Usually you get power account the month after it's been paid. You've got a debt. People who are paying rent. Now, most people pay rent in advance, but at the time that you've got a rent contract, you're contracted to pay for that rent. So you have an obligation to pay that. And it is a debt.
So
now,
pretty much everybody has got a debt of some sort.
Yep. And I'm going to take that to the next step. Now, who's gone into a petrol station, put the nozzle in the car, and filled the tank up with petrol?
Always.
You've just incurred a debt, because between the time that you put the petrol in the car and walk into the station to pay for it, there is an outstanding debt. And, you know, once in my life I did that, and I actually must have been so busy, and I drove off and I forgot it. But I got reminded very quickly that I had a debt outstanding. And of course, you know, we incur that pledge to pay as soon as we make that transaction. Now, I mean, has anyone ever forgotten their wallet when they turn up to a petrol station? Put the petrol in the car, got to the counter and gone,
No. Yeah.
I don't know. Again, you've got a debt. So what happens when the wheels fall off the cart? You know, recently with COVID-19, things have changed for a lot of people. So in biblical times, if you weren't able to pay, you became a servant or a slave to the master or the person who lent you the money. Now, recently, a lot of people have been asking for us directions about having secured loans. And it's one of the hardest things to manage. And the first step in managing that secured loan is identifying whether or not you need that thing. Now, whether that's a car or whether that's a freezer, fridge, a TV. What was the famous one that we had? The steam mop. The steam mop. Do you really need that steam mop? Because while you're having problems and trying to slave to try and pay those additional interest and charges, you're probably not even using the thing. And what we've done with a lot of people is to talk to them about whether they want to surrender that back to the creditor. Not a lot of people realise that once you actually give that item back to the creditor and they sell it, there's no additional interest and no additional charges on it. So it becomes a situation where you can start to make payments to your asset. So we prioritise things in a different way than a lot of people would when they're going to budget. Needs come before wants, and needs also come before luxuries. So at the top of any sort of review that we're doing with anyone, the first thing that comes into our budget or our what we call FinStat is expenses that can't be removed. Food, living costs, mortgage, the petrol to get to work, those sort of things, the necessities, perhaps school fees for kids, and necessary things that the kids have to have, school uniforms perhaps. Then expenses that possibly can be reduced or cut out entirely. Things like maybe gym memberships. Sorry, gym guys, you know, that's one of those things. You know, Sky TV, pay TV. Again, you know, if it's something that is a want rather than a need, you know, perhaps there's different ways of doing it. And right at the bottom, we put the unsecured debt, because that's the way that the insolvency and trustee service look at it, because that's the stuff that you've got to live before everything else. And if you're not able to live, then there's no point in even having debt at all. And there are ways to write things off. Now, again, if you look back at those biblical references we saw, one of those was Psalm 37:21. The wicked borrows and does not repay, but the righteous shows mercy and gives. Now, in our society that we're in at the moment, if you were to use that sentence, it has to be applied on both sides. Now, in the financial world, there's very little mercy, is there? And in a situation where people are in financial difficulty, and I used to use the term a drowning man, and the drowning man is raising his hand out of the water saying, I need help, I need help. Now, if you're at Piha Rescue will be out there like a shot, They'll be bringing out their rubber duckies and they'll be diving in and saving you. But in the debt world, when you raise your hand, for some reason they want to throw you a brick, and
Yeah.
again, the implication from a religious point of view or from a scriptural point of view is there are two sides to the equation. Now, again, if you're a lender from a scriptural point of view, you lend not expecting a return. If it comes back, then you're blessed. If it doesn't come back, then you're forgiving, and therefore you're blessed. In a situation where we apply the world's logic, it's to put as much pressure on you as possible, and there is no forgiveness.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
so from looking at the scriptural elements and then looking at the worldly elements, it's very hard to apply the scriptural elements in the current world, because the current world doesn't live by the scripture that we're under. If you can avoid having debt, then that's absolutely fantastic, and you are truly blessed in your life. If you can't avoid having debt, it's a matter of being picky and trying to make sure that you mitigate what that liability is, and how you can ensure that you're not going to be put into a situation which is beyond your control. Because a lender would be quite happy to push you as far as they can in terms of finance. And, again, we need to be making sure every time we look at our budget that we've left space. We need headspace to deal with the things that come up out of the blue, the blown tire in the car, the repair, the school fees that, or the school uniforms that in January come out. What's that?
Dishwasher.
The dishwasher, which we haven't fixed for, as Lydia reminds me, about 6 months. Yeah, but again, it's not a priority, and it's not something that I would get in debt to fix. But we will put provision there so that we can do it in its due time. The wants, when the wants outweigh the needs, and the reality is that we want something now, that's when we incur the cost. And as I said before, the Bible refers to it as usury, or the cost of money. But if we borrow, then we have to add at least 30% to the cost of everything we look at. So if it's a dishwasher, and that dishwasher is going to cost us $800, then we're going to add another 30% to that cost, and over a year perhaps, or a year and a half, then that dishwasher didn't cost us $800, it cost us $1,100. And
that's a big increase.
It is, and that additional couple of months, it's only going to be a couple of months. I'll never hear the end of this one. That time where we can just put a little bit aside, and then get that item when we need it. Again, it's not a need, because we can wash the dishes. There are other ways of doing it, and more social, of course. Yeah, Lydia will correct you later, but yeah. But the main thing is that because we want things right now, that's why we actually take debt out in a lot of cases. And as Alyssa and Ben pointed out the other week, I had to jog my memory there. They put aside for those things in their right time, and that's when they get to that point where they can go out and get that thing, or whatever it may be. Whether it's, I think Ben and Alyssa were talking about getting a new car, but they were just waiting until that time was right, so that they didn't need to go out and get the finance, because again, you don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't know what's around the corner, and God willing, the kingdom's around the corner. But between here and the kingdom, there's 1,000 repossession agents out there happy to come and get your car from you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at that point, I suppose it's probably open to everybody to ask questions, because there's so much involved with debt. Realistically, I can't cover everything, but I think we've probably touched base on quite a lot of the things that we come across. Maybe I'll just leave you on with one thing though, and this is a perspective thing, and it relates to it's not like Lydia's story. It's a little bit more debt related, but a lady knocked on my door, but called me on the phone, and we were talking about her situation, and she was in tears, absolutely beside herself. Her world was falling apart, and she was getting calls from debt collectors, and she was getting calls from finance companies, threatening all sorts of things, legal action and repossession and debt collection and bad credit and all these sorts of things that she was threatening. And after she'd gone through all of the things that she was talking about, I just asked her a question. I just asked her to tell me about her and what was going on with her. And she gave me this background, and this was about 6 or 7 years ago, but I remember it to this day as if it was a phone call that I'd received this morning. And she said to me, well, 6 months ago, I had cancer. I had a mastectomy, and I've been on medication ever since. I've lost my hair, and I've had all sorts of trips into the hospital, and had problems complications following the treatment. And coming out of that period of time, she said to me that they gave her the all clear about 4 or 5 weeks ago. Now, I don't know what that means in the greater scheme of things, whether there's going to be things that come back, I don't know. But she said to me, she gave me the all clear. And I just said to her on the telephone, I just said to her, what is debt? And she was just, again, she didn't know how to answer. I said, what is debt when you've got your life?
Mm.
And for her, all of a sudden, it was like the yoke of burden was lifted off her. For her, the debt burden is nothing compared to what she had been through. And there are ways of writing that debt off. And a lot of places, even Inland Revenue, have got ways where they can actually look at it and go, well, we're not going to get any more money. The situation is what it is. Let's just call it what it is. And draw a line under it. And everybody can move on and live their life. And that was the best case scenario. And she called me a few months later and said, do you know, that was the biggest thing that anyone has ever said to me, because nobody had ever said to me that it's only money. And only the rich pursue money. We look for money to support ourselves. We don't look for money to become rich.
Yep.
And certainly not at the expense of a woman who was about 63, I think she was. Nobody would wish that on anyone. So,
not a the life. No, not at all. Yeah. So, no, that's an excellent story. Thank you. Thank you for that. Both of you. That's been really interesting. Do you have another couple of questions? What do you think is the best way to broach financial questions with friends or brothers and sisters or whatever without causing offence? Is there a way to bring the conversation? If you think someone might be struggling a bit and you sort of like want to help out or whatever, how do you bring that up?
Well, it's a really, really awkward subject, because there's a couple of subjects that nobody really wants to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about gambling. They don't want to talk about sex, and they certainly don't want to talk about debt. So to bring it up to somebody, first of all, I think you've got to be non-judgmental. What would you have to add?
Yeah, Robert, I think that is, I sort of touched on it. It is very difficult because I don't think people, hopefully they don't think they're being judged, and you are asking them genuinely if they're okay. However, I guess as an example, we do have clients on board where the husband and wife do not know of the situation. So we are dealing with one of the parties, and through privacy and confidentiality, we are not able to talk to that other party. However, sometimes I think maybe a person away, someone that's not so familiar to people, to open up is an avenue. And to be honest, I guess dealing with debt for the last 14 years, there has to be some recognition from the person that help is required.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
So I don't think there's any magical answer to that. I think it's up to the individual to recognise it's just not going the way they planned, and there is plenty of help out there for people. And sometimes actually just talking about it to someone that's not going to judge takes 90% of that pressure off, and then you work on how to then get the debt rehabilitated from that going forward.
So where would we look for help?
Where would they look for help?
So you've obviously got your website, and you'd be a great contact. But
any person that you're looking for help from, they've got to be able to tick a few boxes. One of those boxes, as Lydia touched on, was confidentiality. You want to be reassured that whoever you're talking to is not going to post it on social media or plaster it around the internet and gossip, or you want to be assured that whoever you're talking to is confidential. The second thing that you got to look for is experience. Look for people who have background in the subject. If you're in a situation where you've got some gambling issues, perhaps you like to go to the pokies, you talk to somebody who's skilled in that aspect, in that area. You speak to the gambling helplines, and you look for people who can help you with whatever that problem may be. Again, I can tick my own box and say that we're experienced in debt. Now, we're not experienced in insurance. I'm not going to sell you insurance, but again, budgeting advice is a good start. But what I'd recommend to anyone is to keep their options open in terms of what they're dealing with. Again, we're debt specialists, so we deal with debt. We don't do budgets for people on a day-to-day basis. And there are budgeting organisations for that. And if anyone wants to message Lydia or myself confidentially, we can point you in the right direction for people for different things. So, but one of the starting points for anyone is to, and Ben and Alyssa went through it, is to look at the budget and see where things sit. And sitting down and helping somebody with a budget is probably the first step to recognising where things are going wrong.
Yep. A couple of other questions that have come through. Is there a so-called good debt and bad debt, please?
Ask a bank. Well, there is. I mean, if I was to say there was any sort of good debt, I would say there is, because as I said to you before, you go and fill your car up with petrol so you can get to work, and then you go into the petrol station. That is a form of debt, whether people like to admit that it is or not. Until you've actually paid over the counter, you owe a debt. Now, again, we can differentiate that from a mortgage because there's a signed loan agreement and everything else. But again, as I say, it is still a debt. So when you're comparing good debt to bad debt, I'd potentially say that a good debt is one that at the end of the debt there is an increase for you, or you've got a benefit that doesn't outweigh the cost that you've paid for that debt. Now,
Yeah.
for example, in a
So
mortgage,
has paid an investment rather than a liability, I suppose.
yeah, and for example, in a housing market, I've had a mortgage for as long as I can think, and when I took out the mortgage for my house, the value of that house was a lot lower than what it is now. So the asset itself is appreciating, even though I'm paying interest. So the benefit is effectively outweighing the cost. A bad type of debt would potentially be someone who you're charging, or who is charging you 900% interest. That's the two opposite ends of the scale, I think.
So if I can give you an example, I had a statement come through the other day. A client had borrowed $1,500, and when I confirmed the debt, it was now at $11,500. And when I looked at the statement, every single month they were charging a default interest fee starting at $3,300 and going up. So from a person taking a debt out at $1,500, she now owes $11,500.
Wow.
Unsecured.
That's incredible.
Now, fortunately, that didn't sit well with me, so she now only owes $1,500 again. However, I had to negotiate that fact, but that is, I guess, when we're dealing with this debt situation every day, if you're not dealing with that customer could have likely have paid that amount of money back, even though she couldn't.
Because most of us, and I probably speak for myself, wouldn't know any better. I try not to get into debt, but you go, well, it seems like a legit loan. So.
Yeah, I guess in the situation, she was desperate and she thought she was doing the right thing to sort out the immediate issues that she had. But unfortunately, I guess in the haste, and we all signed documents without reading the small print, it didn't bode well for her. But I mean, it's better now, but I would say that would be a bad debt.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So we have another question. It's, what advice would you give to arranging brothers concerning using completion funds to help with debts of ecclesial members?
That's a very, very good question. The first question that I'd ask is, if it's been brought to the ABs, then it's probably quite a serious thing. The first question I'd say is, how the ABs deal with it is going to have to be in obviously a non-judgmental way, because people get into these situations. Now, sometimes it's from their own use, but in a lot of cases, it's because things have gone sideways, and there's been, COVID-19 has been one thing that has just thrown everybody's world upside down, and in the financial world, I think that's probably going to be about 3 or 4 months before we see that come through. But from the AB's point of view, I think you have to take a logical approach with debt and say, right, first of all, what's the situation? Can you afford the debt? If you can't afford to pay the debt, then there's a bigger underlying problem. And rather than solving the debt problem, you need to find the root cause of that problem. Because if it is a situation where something's happened and there's been a medical thing and they've needed to pay and they've come to the ABs for assistance, then again, scripturally, if they come to the ABs for assistance, should the ABs be turning them down? What I read tonight, it says if a brother comes to you for a loan, do you turn them down? You don't. To the same token, again, through debt and through business, what we try to do is use the approach of the fish. Give a man a fish, feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. So that's where we try and help people to help themselves as well. Again, there are going to be times where the ABs are going to be asked for money, and people honestly need help, and that help should be there for them, because the last thing you want them to do is go and take a payday loan, and then they come back to the ABs and say, instead of needing to borrow $1,000 or needing to get $1,000 of assistance, they need $10,000 worth of assistance. So, and there are a number of organisations who can help at different levels through that. I think probably, again, I can put myself out there that if the ABs have got any questions, they can always direct them to me, and I can share a world of knowledge with them to help them in their decision making, because there are places that give no interest loans if they're up to a certain value to help people through rough times. I've just heard today that if people have lost their job, they can apply for income assistance, and they'll get up to $495 a week. So there's things that are happening out in the community to help people. It just may mean that if they've come to the ABs, that they may be able to get help, but maybe just not enough at not the right time.
Yep. Can I share your contact details in our next Family Matters newsletter?
Yeah, definitely.
That'd be great. Thanks for that. So we'll do that in our next Family Matters newsletter. So we'll have your contact details, probably put your website in, and then people will get in touch with you if they have any extra questions they don't want to share tonight, or if they're having problems, maybe come and see you.
Yep. Yeah. And again, anyone who makes a call, it's completely confidential.
Yeah, that's good.
If there's husbands and wife on tonight, and you're sitting next to your husband and saying, well, I've got this debt, but I'm a bit scared to tell my husband, maybe it's something that we can talk about. And first and foremost, if we had one piece of advice to give to husbands and wife, is just be open and honest with each other, because together you're much stronger in dealing with matters when it comes to finance. If you're hiding things, it may be a bit painful cracking that egg, but once you've actually laid the cards on the table, it's much easier for you both to deal with it. However, as I say, if confidentiality is required, then confidentiality is what people receive.
Oh, thank you so much, both of you. It's been really interesting, really informative, really encouraging, I'm sure, for those who are struggling at the moment, and maybe for those who are listening now, but are looking forward in those 2 or 3 months' time where things are going to get difficult. it's really good to know a little bit about where to turn, what to do. So things, and what the Bible says about it. It's been really great. So thank you very much. Next week on Family Matters, we have a two-part series. Part one is depression. Part one with Dan and Jenny Woodcock. And then on the 8th we have part two of that. Dan and Gina are a really interesting couple. Dan has been through some severe depression and spent years in that dark hole, and he's willing to share his story with us, and Gina's going to tell us how she came through that and coped with all those years in their marriage and how they kept it all together, and also how we can relate and help people in that same situation. Also, we have coming up Good Foundations for the Early Years of Marriage on the 15th of June, and what you can do when you really mess up. And I think we sort of hinted at that a couple of times tonight. What you can do when you really mess up, and that's with Doug and Cindy Mogg. So keep those in mind. And if you want to get the Family Matters emails, you can get them from me. Just email me at robert@thinkythings.com. And look out for the past recordings on our website. I'll put that link up soon. Matt, would you mind closing with prayer? That would be really great if you could. And after we've done that, really appreciate it if everyone could turn their cameras on, and Matt and Lydia are still around for a few more questions and discussion and that sort of thing. So it'll be great. So thank you, Matt.
Lord, we thank you for this time that we can meet together to reflect upon your word and how you've set the plan out for us. You know what goes on in our lives more than we do. You know that it's happened in the past, and you know that there are things that are going to happen in the future which are going to affect us. Lord, we'd ask that as we go into the coming week, that we reflect upon what you've given us to help us set and walk that path that leads to your kingdom. And if we stray from that path, help us to find our way back so that we can keep our faith in earnest and have that kingdom as our goal. Be with us to support our brothers and sisters as they have need. Be with us to support friends and family if they're in the truth or if they're not. And be with those who are sick and infirm, ill, and need your support. Guide them and help them in their walk. Be with us, bless us, guide us, and keep us. Through Jesus we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Please feel free to turn.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found the episode helpful. Don't forget, most of these episodes are also available as videos on our video channel, cdvideo.org. So head over and take a look. If you have any comments or questions or suggestions, please get in touch or leave us a voice message. We love to hear your feedback. You can email us at btf@cdvideo.org. If you enjoyed the episode, then please share it with others. Until next time, may God bless you in your studies and your walk towards God's kingdom. Amen.